We will check in with Mark. And first, our lead story, everyone. Presidential candidate Senator Rand Paul says he wants to make life a little more simple for us tax filers and maybe put a few accountants out of business along the way. In an exclusive interview, he tells me he wants to bust up the 70,000 pages worth of tax code that we have, all in favor of a simple flat rate for everyone, 14.5%. Why 14.5%? Why is that the magic number? And is it going to bring in enough cash for us to pay our bills? I asked him.
The reason it's 14.5 and not 14 or not 15 is that we looked at what kind of tax cut that would generate. We want to argue that a tax cut leaving more money in New Hampshire, leaving more money in Iowa, leaving more money in Kentucky is good for the economy, and that's where jobs are created. And if you send more money to Washington, that the problem is actually you have less jobs being created. So we haven't had a Republican candidate in a long time, maybe since Steve Forbes, who truly argued for a flat tax and argued that we'd create jobs by doing it.
But, you know, Steve Forbes didn't have a lot of success with it.
You know, I think Steve Forbes was before his time in some ways, but he also is still remembered for being for it. He's also looked at as a thoughtful person, and he's actually looked at our plan and thinks it's a good idea. And I think had Steve Forbes been governor of New York before he ran, that would have helped also. It's harder to run if you haven't already been elected, but I don't think that is any kind of knock on the idea that he presented, which was that a lower, flat, simpler tax would be good for the economy.
The idea is that you're going to stimulate growth, which stimulates revenue, but what about those who say, what if you can't quite get the revenue? How are we going to pay our bills?
Cut spending. I mean, government's so huge. I mean, everywhere you turn, there's money being spent that, I mean, it's just outrageous the money is spent. I think we spent $2 million in the NIH budget on origami condoms. I'm thinking that may not be something that the federal government needs to research. I think
we can clearly do a better job when it comes to some of the frivolous spending there. But what about things like defense? You're talking about also cutting defense spending?
No, I'm actually talking about that the number one priority for spending would be national defense. So when I look at priorities and I say, how will we spend money? The first priority for me and for the country is to defend the country. But I'm saying that you shouldn't borrow more money to add to defense. So we spend about $500 billion on defense. Plus or minus, depending on how you count it. Sometimes it's $600 billion. But the thing is, that's a lot of money that we spend on defense.
Let me ask you, though, how's this going to play in the rest of the country when people say we have an income inequality issue? This is a theme that a lot of the Democrats have been advancing over and over and over again. And you've got the rich and the poor. And a lot of people aren't going to like the idea of you coming in and saying, OK, if everyone's 14.5%, that means the wealthy fat cats are 14.5% too.
Here's the interesting thing. Under the current system, under the current Democrat president, and under Democrat mayors and Democrat governors, income inequality has gotten worse in our country. So you can't argue that the current policies are making it less so. We think it's making it more so.
What do you do about entitlements, Social Security, Medicare?
2/3 of our budget are the entitlements, and they need to be paid for. What we will do under our plan is that we will just say they have to be paid for, and that's a priority. So instead of separating the money into different pools, all the money will come in through this business tax and through the personal income tax. And then we say that you have to fully fund Social Security and you have to fully fund Medicare. And so that puts the pressure on government to say, well, that's what we have to do first. And I think those are trust funds. That should be done first. National defense is important. I'm sure we'll fund national defense. And then after that, then priorities have to be made with what money is left over.
When you say priorities, do you mean changing that system? Should we move towards private accounts as President Bush
we haven't
once
put forward a
suggested?
social security plan, but I have talked about the fact that we used to have 16 workers and 1 retiree. Now we have 3 workers and 1 retiree. We used to live to be 65 years of age. Now we live to 80. So the system as it's constructed isn't working. The system as it's constructed actually pays out more than comes in. So we want to fix that, and that'll be on another day. Today we're trying to fix the tax code and scrap 70,000 pages of the tax code, but there will be another day in the near future where we'll come back and have a plan for entitlements as well.
You might put some accountants out of business. Let me get back to defense, though. You said that this would be the biggest priority in terms of spending. What do you say to your critics on Capitol Hill who say, you know what, Senator Paul was irresponsible when it came to the NSA data collection issue because we need that information.
I think they need to get outside the Beltway a little bit and meet the rest of America. Most Americans actually agree with me. If you survey Americans under the age of 40, 83% of them say that President Obama collecting the phone records has gone too far. The court agrees with me. The appellate court, just below the Supreme Court, said that it's illegal. And then 3 different commissions, bipartisan, neutral commissions, said that, you know what, the data's not catching terrorists. I think, frankly, we're overwhelmed with data, so much so that we're not actually going after the terrorists. I want more records of terrorists to be collected.
Yep.
Let me finish. I want less records of people for whom there is no suspicion to be collected. So I don't want indiscriminate collection. I want more collection specifically of those for whom we have suspicion. But what if you're looking
for patterns? I mean, and that's what they say that they're trying to do. You may not know that that person is a questionable person or a person of interest when you initially see that data.
I don't think you have to give up your liberty to get security. And in fact, when the independent commissions have looked at this, the President's Civil Liberties and Privacy Committee looked at this, Republicans and Democrats. The Inspector General of the Department of Justice looked at this as well. They found no unique information coming from this program. It's extraordinarily expensive. It's extraordinarily invasive of our privacy, and they didn't find any new data that was catching terrorists. Here's the thing is, we had all this in place, and the Boston bombers still bombed us. The Boston bomber we knew about. We had been told about him by the Russians, but we didn't have any record of him going back to Chechnya.
Last question to you. As you look at the Republican field, which keeps getting bigger every day, we now have Donald Trump in the race. What are your thoughts on him? What are your thoughts on Jeb Bush?
I think the more the merrier. I think that there'll be nobody in the race who is as strong an advocate for privacy as I am. There'll be no one else in the race who thinks that we should have a reasonable foreign policy where we're not involved everywhere all the time and that war is the last resort, that we have a strong national defense, but that is to deter attack, not always to be involved in the Middle East or elsewhere. So I think we have our position carved out pretty well, and the other 55, they can carve it up themselves. What's left?
We're sending 450 advisors now into Iraq. Is that the right kind of strategy? Should we keep sending people?
We're doing it with the president also acknowledging that he has no strategy. So without a strategy, no, it's not a very good idea. I think one of the things we should do, one of the things I voted for this week, is to arm the Kurds. What we've done is we send the weapons to Baghdad, which is primarily Shiite, and the weapons don't get to the Kurds adequately. So I'd send them directly to the Kurds. The Kurds are the best fighters over there. I would also tell the Kurds, if you're willing to fight for a homeland, when you're done, it's yours.
Senator, thank you so much. Good to have you here.